Hello there everyone, my name is Chelsea. Welcome to Little Mountain Ranch and to my northern garden. I garden in the central interior of British Columbia, well kind of the northern central interior of British Columbia, Canada. And we are in a zone 3B with around 110 frost-free days. And I'm going to take you on a complete tour of our garden, which is around 1/3 of an acre here on our ranch. Where we're standing right now is what we call our main garden. This is where we grow a lot of the vegetables that we eat throughout the summertime, but also some of the crops that we harvest for winter storage. We're also going to tour our crop garden and our forest garden. My very favorite time in the garden is usually the very end of June when everything starts to take off. The weeds are kind of managed at that point. Harvest isn't coming in, so it's not feeling quite as overwhelming. But this year we're about a week to 2 weeks behind. So right where we are right now, which is around July 11th, is where my garden is at its sweet spot. In another 2 weeks, things are really going to explode, and that will also be really beautiful. But I love this stage of the garden where things are just starting to go and the flowers are starting to bloom. One of the questions that I get frequently when I do garden tours is, how do I get my garden to look so lush and kind of a little bit of a jungle vibe here in the north? So I'm going to share with you some of my tips for that as we go through the garden tour. We're going to start right here at the entrance of my garden where my zucchini plant. So I plant zucchini on both sides of the entrance of my garden. There is a couple of motivations I have for doing this, but the primary one is because these plants are going to grow huge and they're going to start to cover up the black weed barrier that they're growing in, and they'll encroach a little bit on the pathway on either side here. So that would be tip number one, is the entrance to your garden. Grow some large plants there so that when you come in, you kind of have to weave your way through some of those larger plants, and it gives you this feeling of going into a separate space, separate from the rest of your yard area. And I just love this. One of the other reasons that I grow my zucchini right here by the entrance to the garden is because these are going to be some of the first larger harvests of vegetables that we're going to get in the garden. So it's easy to come pick these all right here and get them up to the house. What I used to do is plant my zucchini interdispersed in some of the other beds in my garden because I really loved the way that that looked. But I did find that I ended up losing a lot of my zucchini because zucchini grow incredibly fast and you want to harvest them when they're about this big. When they get much bigger than that, they start getting kind of watery and seedy. And when my plants weren't right at the entrance where I would see them when I first came into the garden, I was constantly losing zucchini. Let me show you though, we actually are going to have zucchini within the next week. I'm so excited. Do you see how this flower here has a fruit at the base of it? So this is a female flower. This one over here that does not have a fruit at the base is a male flower. One of the common problems with growing zucchini is having the fruit just kind of hit this size and then shrivel up and fall off. And that is due to not being pollinated. So one of the ways that you can kind of guarantee pollination, you can see this beautiful flower here. So this area right here where the pollen is, that needs to get pollinated by a male flower. So what you can do here is pop off one of these male flowers like so, peel back the petals, and I usually just pull them off like that, and then rub some of this pollen onto this part of this flower, and that will pollinate your zucchini. I have around 6 zucchini plants, so I get a lot of zucchini and I preserve it in all different kinds of ways, which I will show you when we get to that point where we're actually putting this up into the pantry for winter. One of the other things that I love doing at the entrance of my vegetable garden is to plant some flowers. So can you see that little splash of pinks, purples, and reds down there? These are anemones. Aren't they just so beautiful? We just mowed and weed whacked in the garden, so everything has a little green flecks all over it. But this is the first time I have planted anemones and I absolutely love them. I also have some cosmos here. I have some volunteer calendula just about to bloom. And I love that when I walk in the garden, I get to see this little splash of color right here. And then right in behind, over behind the fountain there, I have a whole area of flowers that are going to be blooming in about 2 weeks. So we have a mix of sunflowers. I have some bachelor buttons over there and some cosmos. So when you come into the garden and you go down the pathway, you're going to get another shot of color right there. I usually play around with different types of flowers each year. There are some that I always plant, like calendula, sunflowers, poppies, zinnia, cosmos. Those are kind of the standard ones that I always plant, but I always play around with something new. Like this year with the anemones, and there's 2 more things that I have planted in my garden this year for color alone, color and beauty, that I am so excited about. I am so thrilled with the dahlias that you can see behind me here. They have just started to bloom. They are absolutely stunning. This is the first time that I have grown dahlias from bulbs. I actually got all of these from Costco, if you can believe it. I've had such good luck with all of the bulbs and the crams that I bought from Costco this year. So the anemones, these, what else did I get? I got lilies, a few other odds and ends, and they all did fabulously for me. The only ones that didn't do super great were the clematis. I only ended up with 1 clematis that came up, but these just look absolutely magnificent here. And within about another week to 2 weeks, this is going to be just filled with beautiful flowers, big, beautiful dahlia flowers, and I cannot wait. It is very bright out here. I might need to go grab my sun hat, but this right here, this entire bed goes all the way down to right here, is absolutely chocked full of poppies, all different kinds of poppies, and it is just about to explode with color. I also have a few wildflowers in here. You can see there's some bachelor buttons right here that have just started to bloom. I actually came out this morning and they had just bloomed, which makes me excited because they're going to be a little bit earlier than the poppies, but there are hundreds of poppies in this bed, and I was a little bit unsure whether it was going to work because poppy seeds are super tiny. So I just mixed a whole bunch of different poppy seeds together, different varieties, and I spread them in this bed. I have quite a few weeds that come up in my garden in the spring, like most of us do, and the weed that decided to take over this bed was the chickweed. And so the chickweed came up, and I thought for sure that it was going to choke out all of my poppies, and I couldn't really weed the chickweed out because I don't know if you've ever had chickweed in your garden before, but I don't know, it just kind of has multiple little roots everywhere, and every time I would go pull one out, it would pull out a whole bunch of the poppies, so I just left it. And then as the poppies started to grow, I went in and just started pulling out the chickweed, and I've still been doing that. But the good news is that now that the chickweed is larger, it's actually coming out fairly easily. And over the last month or so that I've been pulling it out, I have it mostly under control at this point. And now the poppies are large enough to be choking out the chickweed, and I cannot wait to see this in full bloom. I have one other little patch of a poppy that's called Grape Crush poppy that I think is going to look so incredibly beautiful when it starts blooming too. So here's another tip for a little bit of a wild, magical feeling garden, is to plant flowers that will self-seed in your garden. And when those self-seed in the spring, let them come up wherever they come up. So you can see behind me here, this is my onion, one of my onion beds right here. And I have calendula that is coming up there. I grew calendula there last year and it's seeded beautifully there. And I know it's going to choke out some of those onions, but I feel like it is a reasonable trade-off because I'm going to get this beautiful yellow and orange right there. I have the same, almost all of the sunflowers that you can see in my garden here. We have one coming up over there. We have 2 more that are coming up here, and then I have them coming up all over my garden. These are volunteer sunflowers. I do have a whole row of sunflowers that I did plant intentionally along the bottom of my garden, which I just cannot wait to see bloom. They're all multicolored sunflowers down there, but all the rest of them are volunteered. And very rarely do I go and pull them out. I just let them come wherever they decide they want to come, and that adds an added level of kind of whimsy and magic to the garden, at least in my opinion it does. So one of the other things that I recommend you do in your garden is plant a few perennial flowers. So right here, this is a patch of Shasta daisies that I put into the garden about 3 years ago or so now, and I love them. They're just beautiful. They're so cheerful, bright white, so they add a little bit of light to the garden as well. And I just love it. Is there anywhere else that I have perennial flowers coming up? I don't think so, but I do want to plant some more because I just love that. One of the other things that I love to do is kind of mix my plantings a little bit so that you can see right here, I have a mix of a bunch of different things. So I have lettuces that are growing right here, which I actually need to come in and do a big harvest on because those are going to bolt soon. In behind here, I have celery growing. Then I have some baby pak choy that I've actually tried to plant twice this year, and it's bolted on me both times. So I've decided to let those ones flower. And then in behind that, we have some absolutely gorgeous fennel. And then of course, a volunteer sunflower. And then with the dahlias in the back, this whole spot right here is just gonna look so beautiful in about a week's time. Okay, so something else that I like to do is where I know that I'm gonna be walking the most in my garden. So this is one of the main pathways. In behind us here is my forest garden. This is one of the main pathways I come through. So when I planted here, I kind of kept in mind that I wanted this to feel a little bit like not a tunnel, because I don't have stuff over the top, although I'd love to put an archway in at some point when I get organized enough in the spring. But I do like to have some taller things like this, and these carrots are going to grow up about that high and kind of come in a little bit on the pathway, not too much. I wouldn't want to put anything that was vining here, because then that would make it too hard to walk through. But I just love that feeling of being able to walk along and kind of run your hands like this along the plants, along the main pathways. Am I sounding really weird? I just realized, I'm like, wow, I have some very odd ideas about gardening, but this is what makes it fun for me. One of the other reasons that I plant flowers all over my garden as well is because sometimes the garden can be a little bit overwhelming, and it can be a little bit tedious with having to keep it weeded and all of that. And I find that having flowers popping up throughout the summer, all different colors, and just kind of that magical feeling of a flower, just makes me motivated to come down and wander around my garden. And usually when I'm wandering around, I'm picking things or harvesting things. So it's just an added kind of motivation to be down in the garden. One of the things that I kind of regret about my planting this year that I did last year that I absolutely love, and that was, instead of planting potatoes, which is what is in this little patch right here, I filled this with squash, and I put a red chair, a bright red chair in the middle of it, and the squash just grew as squash do and filled this entire space out with these giant, beautiful dark green leaves. And I loved standing in this corner of the garden and looking down and having that kind of at the forefront. It was just absolutely beautiful, and I wish that I had done that this year. But instead, I planted them down here. I do not love the aesthetic of weed barrier, but I do love how it chokes out the weeds. And if you can keep it on for a couple of years, it will really kill off, especially if you have any invasive weeds, or any kind of weeds. But I had some invasive weeds in this spot, and it will kill them off and then give you some workable ground again. So I covered this patch, which I've gardened in intermittently over the years. I've grown all different things down here with this weed barrier, and then I just couldn't stand the aesthetic. So I decided to plant squash in this. I know that once this grows, I did grow squash in weed barrier last year up in a different part of my garden, and it did cover it up entirely and looked really beautiful by kind of mid-August or so. So hopefully that happens again this year. And I have, I think, about 10 different varieties of squash planted in here. So it should be fun come fall. One of my favorite things to do in the fall is harvesting squash, because the leaves cover the squash, and I usually plant some really fun varieties, so I get to go on a little bit of a treasure hunt and find beautiful squash. This would be one of my other tips, is to experiment a little bit with new varieties each year. So once you kind of figure out what grows really well in your area, what you can preserve, what you have time to take care of, and what your family actually likes, once you kind of get those figured out and those varieties figured out, definitely stick to those year after year, but have fun too, and make sure that you try a few varieties that are just for fun. So when we do our big squash harvest, I'll show you some of the fun varieties that I picked this year that I just thought were beautiful or interesting or unique, and that makes gardening kind of keep the magic alive for me. So where we are right now is where I planted my garlic. So I plant garlic in the fall, and I'm going to be pulling this garlic out of the garden within the next, probably in about 2 weeks or so, I'll be pulling it out. And I'll bring you along with me for that, because I have lots of different varieties of garlic in here, and I'm hopeful it's going to be a really good garlic year, because the bulbs are looking fantastic. But once I pull all of this garlic out, I'm going to have this entire row empty, and I don't want that because I want to have something planted in there, especially because it's right in the middle of my garden area. So growing a fall garden in our short season is a little bit tricky. We just don't have a lot of time. We're going to be getting light frost potentially at the end of August, and definitely by the second week of September, so we don't have a lot of time left in the season. So the best thing that I can recommend for those of you in a northern garden is if you are going to have a space like this that is going to be cleared out, start your seeds indoors or in a greenhouse or somewhere that's protected for whatever plants you might want to transplant in there, so that by the time this comes out, you have some good sized starts to give yourself a little bit of a head start, whereas people with longer growing season can usually just direct seed. This time of year for us in the north, it's not a good idea to wait. It's a good idea to get things in the ground, or at least start it as soon as possible. So I have started some beets, some beans, lettuce of course, and spinach. Spinach does really well in a northern garden. I usually do a planting early in the spring and then one again around this time of year. And on the topic of spinach, I have something to show you. Friends, look at the size of this spinach. So this is one plant, and this is actually a spinach that I planted here last year, around this time last year. And it came up in the spring and has just grown into this enormous plant. I have never seen spinach like this before, but I did plant a few new varieties last year. One of them was Bloomsburg or Bloomsfield long-standing spinach, and that's what I think this one is, but I'm not 100% sure. So if any of you out there have grown spinach like this before, let me know. So here's the really cool thing about this spinach, is normally when spinach bolts, which is what this is doing here, it's forming its flowers and its seeds, you can't eat it. It tastes really bitter. But this spinach, even though it is so huge, even though it has been growing since early spring, even though it's bolting, it tastes perfectly fine. Tastes just like spinach. Good spinach, actually, really good. So my plan here is to let this actually go to seed and harvest the seed off of it, unless it is a hybrid. So I'm gonna have to figure out what this actually is, because if it is a hybrid, then the offspring will not breed true. You need open pollinated seed in order to get, to be able to harvest the seed and have the offspring breed true. Yum. Last year, I tried exactly what you can see here, only I've made some modifications this year in hopes that I won't have the same issues I had last year. So I grew sunflowers all along the bottom, but I grew them really close together. And because this bed is at the bottom of my garden, and my garden's actually on a bit of a slope, this bed stays nice and moist, which is great for growing, but it does make the soil really soft. And when these sunflowers start getting really big, their roots actually don't go down very deep. They started to just fall over as soon as there was a little bit of wind or anything like that, and I ended up losing a lot of the sunflowers down here. So this year, I've done something a little bit different. I spaced them apart more intentionally. I didn't just scatter the seed down here. I also have some sticks. You can see one there. I have a pile of sticks to be able to prop them up if they start looking like they're leaning over. And I also didn't plant so many flowers in the front. So I just did a row of zinnia in the front instead of doing cosmos and zinnia, because honestly, you couldn't even see the zinnia with all the big giant cosmos along here anyway. But I think it's going to look just beautiful when it starts to bloom, and it covers up the weed barrier that's in behind that is kind of protecting my hayfield from crawling into my garden, which it really likes to try to do. And we've found that putting this strip of weed barrier here really does help with that. One of the other things that I love in my garden that I feel like, I don't know, just looks nice and is relatively low maintenance really for a garden like this. So I do have a no-till garden. I don't till my garden up every spring, so that's part of why I can do this. I have grass pathways and we just mow them. One thing you do want to make sure that you do if you do a garden like this is to make sure that your lawnmower can actually fit in your pathways. The one kind of downside, I guess, of having a garden like this is that the grass does start to kind of infringe on my beds a little bit. So usually in the spring, I have to recut the sides of my beds just to move the beds back out into the pathways again. But I really love the aesthetic of it. I love the feeling of walking through here in my bare feet in the summertime, and I think that it looks really beautiful. And overall, for a no-till garden, I actually find this a lot lower maintenance than doing something like wood chips or gravel or just having to keep them weeded. What I used was just the native grasses that are all over this area, but also I used some high traffic lawn mix. So just make sure that it's not one that has added fertilizers and things like that unless they're organic. But I just seeded, and anytime I end up with a bare patch in my garden, I just put a little bit of new seed on it. So the thing that's most important though is you do keep it mowed down, because even a lawn will produce seed, and that seed can blow into your beds and just kind of cause a mess. So do keep it nice and mowed if you want to have pathways like this. I know somebody's going to mention this because we've talked about this a lot. You can see that I have some cabbages down over there, some Brussels sprouts and other brassicas, and I have netting over most of my brassicas. Over here you can see I have 3 rows of broccoli and cauliflower that are all covered in netting. And I took all of that netting off, I think about 4 or 5 days ago, because it wasn't covering everything properly. It was looking really messy, and my whole plan was I was going to put it back on. Cabbage moths are the reason that you want to have your brassicas covered, because cabbage moths will lay eggs, and those eggs will hatch into little worms that will put holes in your cabbages, and plus those little worms get stuck in all over the place, especially with broccoli and cauliflower, and there is nothing more gross than going to take a bite of a vegetable and having a worm in it. So keeping these covers on has almost entirely eliminated that issue for me. But I took those off and I just haven't gotten around to putting them back on. There is a natural insecticide that I use that's called BT that I'll probably go spray all these with and then cover them back up again. And that will eliminate the worms that may have gotten in or laid on here while I've been negligent in my garden. Oh my gosh, look. Can you guys see the cabbage moths under my netting? Oh my goodness. Where did that other one go? They are very determined. So if your netting, which mine apparently is not, there's somewhere that it's up, is not touching the ground and actually pegged, or even better, 2x4s along the edge of it, oh, look at that, right here. I'm gonna have to peg that down. Anyway, the butterflies will actually make it in underneath and then lay in underneath. So this is only as good as keeping it actually tucked in, which apparently I need to do. So part of the reason that this is happening, and I have not had this happen before, is because my broccoli is growing so huge that it's actually pulling up the netting all the way along. So I'm probably just gonna end up having to spray these anyway, regardless. But check this out. We have beautiful broccoli heads forming in here. Very exciting. Over on this side of the garden, I have some pickling cucumbers. I didn't grow that many this year because I had such a bumper crop last year, and still a lot of pickles in my pantry. And then green beans in behind. And then behind that, we have a bunch more squash. Along this side is the zucchini and more squash. We have some beautiful beets. If you like rutabagas or turnips, definitely recommend growing them, because they are the easiest root crop to grow, I find. And you can actually eat these leaves steamed when they're nice and young. You can actually eat them all the way through, but they taste best when they're young like this. But this little crop is looking pretty good. I have some Egyptian walking onions here. So these have the bulbs on the top, and then these fall over and they seed right into the ground. And they come up in our northern garden every spring, no problem. We have some volunteer chamomile growing here, and I'm actually going to do a harvest on these. And this is that little flower patch that I was showing you from the front entrance. I can't wait till this is all blooming. I have been growing in green stock garden planters. That's what this is here, this vertical planter, for 2 years. So this is my 2nd year, and I have learned a lot about what works and what doesn't work in these. And the sweet alyssum that you can see down the side, so all of this here is sweet alyssum that I started from seed in, I think, the beginning of March. Really grows well. But one of the problems with growing it is that it shades out all of the flowers that are below it. So if I had known it would grow so robustly, I probably would have just put it around the bottom of this green stalk, and then the smaller plants on the top. But it still looks kind of wild and beautiful, and it smells absolutely incredible. It smells so good. Like out in the main garden, I always have some volunteer sunflowers in my high tunnel as well. So this year I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 different sunflowers, and it's fun because these sunflowers that grow in here are a hybrid of all the sunflowers that I've been growing in here for the last 5 years. So I get all different kinds of heads that are mixes of ones I've had throughout the years, which is really fun. And I just think they look really beautiful in here. So again, you do sacrifice optimal growing conditions for the plants that are growing underneath it, but I feel like it's a sacrifice worth making for the beauty of it. This is my first year trying to grow eucalyptus. Actually, no, that's not true. I tried growing it last year and it didn't grow. It just started and then it just quit. But this is the first year that I have actually been successful growing it, and it is loving being out in the high tunnel. The one thing that I've learned about this is that it needs a lot of water. So even when it looks like it's still damp, I will give it water, and that seems to be working really well for it. But it smells amazing. I'm going to be able to do another harvest on my basil. I have basil growing over there. So I just cut these completely down 5 days ago, I think, and they're already ready to be harvested off again. So I'll do that a few times throughout the year. One of the things that I totally failed on this year was the okra that was growing in here. I finally just pulled it out because it just would not grow, and replaced it with some long English cucumbers. And this is one of the other things that I have noticed this year that I have not noticed in years past, and that is that I am getting some tomatoes growing on here, but not as many as I am used to. And in fact, over on this side where I have Amish paste tomatoes, again, there's a few clumps, but not a lot. Like, look at all of that bare space where there's not tomatoes. So I don't know if that's caused by the cold spring we had, or if maybe I over fertilized in the spring. I'm not sure. But either way, I don't think it's going to be the best tomato year I've ever had, but I'm still going to get a few. This one is doing awesome. I've already harvested off of this one. Look at all of the tomatoes growing on here. So this one was a Marzito, I believe is what this one was called, and it's quite prolific. I have tomatoes coming all the way up it. The mystery of our gorgeous purple pepper. So we have beautiful purple flowers on here, and then a beautiful purple, almost black pepper. And that's actually how this pepper got its name. So this is a black Hungarian pepper, and apparently it's very similar in heat to a jalapeno, but it has a little bit more sweetness to it. So I'm very excited about that. It's beautiful, and it looks like it's going to be a prolific producer with all those flower buds on it. So while the tomatoes might not be doing very well, the peppers are doing quite well. They all look really healthy and happy. I have tons of cayenne peppers coming. We have a sweet pepper here, some more of our Hungarian hot wax. And just in general, the peppers are looking fantastic. Right here is kind of a perfect example of how I love to grow. So we have tomato here. We have a gorgeous zucchini in here, volunteer sunflower, a bush delicata, and a little dianthus hiding in there. So if you can just imagine all of these plants, if this was all just the same variety of plant, it wouldn't look nearly as beautiful as this looks, with just the different textures, the little bit of color in there. I just love this so much. I actually grew zucchini in here, I think it was 2 years ago, and said that I wouldn't again because it grows just as well outside, and I didn't want to use up the real estate of the high tunnel for zucchini when I can grow it outside. But I had an extra zucchini plant and a little bit of space, so I decided to pop it in here, and I think it looks gorgeous. And look at this, friends. So this is our melons. We have a bunch of different types of melons here, and I decided to string up a few of them just to have some of these runners having a place to go. So one thing that I will have to do is support these quite well. My plan is to run them across right here. And then when the fruit starts to develop, in order to hold it there, I'll probably have to use a nylon stocking or something like that to hold the fruit, and then tie it up over here so that it doesn't break the vine, but I think it'll look really pretty. Look how happy they look though. These wave petunias by the door, the front door, just went crazy, and they look beautiful. And look at this gemstone marigold. Isn't that beautiful? And it smells absolutely amazing. I have lots of tomatoes coming on my green stalk over here. There's one we can eat. Some of the things that I do in my high tunnel to give it a little bit less of an industrial vibe is I have these beautiful bunting flags you can see here. These are made by a woman named Chris Ann Dunn, and I love them. I actually take them down, or I took them down last year in the fall so that they wouldn't fade out too much. They are starting to fade out a bit, but I still think they look beautiful. What I'm probably going to end up doing at the end of this year is dyeing them some bright colors so that I can have some more color in here, but I just love them and it adds a little whimsy to the high tunnel. I also have the weed barrier in the pathways in here, and I keep a broom in here and I actually keep it swept, which I just feel like gives it a kind of tidy look. And then of course I have my green stalk planted here, and then a couple of bins of beautiful flowers on either side, and then doing little things like having the watermelon grow up and over and along, and then doing like I showed you in the back where there's some mixture of plants that look beautiful, having the volunteer sunflowers. All of these things I feel like remove the industrial feeling of this space and create something really beautiful that I love being in. One of my favorite things to do is come down here in the evening when it's raining and work in the high tunnel. It's very, very peaceful. The last thing that I'd like to add to this space is some type of water feature of some sort, like a little plug-in fountain or something like that, so that I can have the sound of the water down here as well, but I'm pretty happy with it. This is what we call our crop garden, and I am so happy with the way everything is growing in here this year. Look at the size of these potatoes. They are just humongous and doing so well and flowering beautifully. I don't hill my potatoes. I usually just dig a trench, plant them in fairly deep, maybe about 4 to 6 inches or so, and then I top it with rotten hay. And you do want to make sure that it's not fresh hay that has nice seeds in it. You will, if you are using hay as mulch, you will end up with grass seed. That's inevitable. But one of the ways that we mitigate that is we just go through and lift up the mulch every, I don't know, 3 or 4 weeks or so, just to loosen any of those roots that might be starting to grow. But the biggest thing that you can do is just keep your mulch really thick and continue to plan to mulch with hay mulch or some type of thick mulch year after year in a spot that you've used hay mulch. I planted a lot of onions this year, almost 1,000 actually. It might even be a little bit more than 1,000 onions because last year I was short, and we use onions multiple times during the week, sometimes every day. We really love onions in our house, so I need a lot of them. I'll show you how I preserve them and store them and all that kind of stuff when it comes to harvest season. But the onions are doing great. And as you can see, I have some of those gem marigolds here that just look beautiful at the ends of the aisles. I had a couple of extra squash plants that I put in here, and then back there is a little patch of test corn that I'm doing. I'm trying a new variety of corn that is supposed to grow well in the north. I have corn is kind of hit or miss for me. Some years it does great, other years not so much. It does seem to be doing okay this year, so we'll see if this variety does well. I'll probably try a larger patch next year. This garden is definitely a little bit more industrial in its style. I do still try to have some flowers in it, but it is definitely more our kind of main crops that we harvest for storage for winter, put in our root cellar, freeze dry can, all of those kinds of things. Last up, we have our forest garden down there, so we're going to head down there and check it out. This is my forest garden, and I know a lot of you that have been here for a while, you have been able to watch the build of this forest garden from 7 to 8 years ago, I think it was now, up until the point it's at now, where it's actually producing for us. I have had some unusual issues with my forest garden this year that I have never had before. Oh my goodness, I'm seeing one right now. So weird. My sea buckthorn has tipped over. What? This is so strange. And then another issue that I've had with my sea buckthorn, I was actually going to bring this up before I turned around and saw that that had fallen over, was that I had die-off happen on my sea buckthorn, just random branches dying. I think this was actually from, we had some drought conditions in the early part of the spring, and I noticed it was starting to die off, so I put some hoses down here and really soaked them. But that was weeks and weeks ago, so that wouldn't have impacted my sea buckthorn falling over like that. That is so strange. Anyway, so this is what sea buckthorn berries look like. This is when they're unripe, of course, but they're about that size, but they'll turn bright orange, and I make a juice out of them that is super high in vitamin C. It's very bitter, but it's good. But I grow it for the nutritional capacity of it. What the heck am I going to do about this situation? That is just so weird. Yeah, because it kind of like lifted out of the ground here and just fell right over, and it's way too big to prop up. So what I think I'm going to do, because it's so loaded with fruit, just loaded, is leave it, because it's not going to die like this before I can tell the roots are still in the ground there. And then harvest all of the fruit off of this, and then cut it right down to the ground in the fall, because these send out runners like crazy. So I'm not worried about it not growing, because I still have this giant one back here. I'm just going to cut off the dead stuff. That is more than enough fruit for what we need. So I will, yeah, that's what I think I'll probably end up doing. Down below our hayfield over there where the scrub is, it actually stays quite wet down there, and the elderberry will probably do really well down there. So that's likely what I'll do. Several of you were asking for an update on my cherry. So I had aphids in my cherry tree this year for the first time ever. But this cherry has been struggling all through winter. I ended up losing a bunch of the growth off of it in the spring, and then it just did not take off when it leafed out, and I hardly have any cherries on it. Normally this is loaded every single year, and I get enough to can a whole bunch of jars of cherry pie filling. We can only grow sour cherries up here, but this makes the most gorgeous pie filling. Needless to say, because it was under stress, I think it just made it vulnerable to the aphids. So I ended up with aphids on this tree. But I also ended up with ladybugs, tons of ladybugs. So I decided to leave it for 2 weeks to see if the ladybugs could take care of the aphids, and check this out. So are you able to see the undersides of these leaves here? One thing that you'll notice is there is not a lot of aphid action. There's still the odd aphid, like there's a couple right there, which we'll just take care of. There's a couple up over here, but really not that bad at all. So the ladybugs seem to be able to manage the aphid population on this tree. And honestly, I think that this tree is actually looking healthier than it was a few weeks ago. So I'm just going to continue on with this whole hands-off approach, let nature do its thing, and hopefully it'll rebound, because I really do love this poor tree. Look at how crooked the trunk is. This was a tree that was under duress when I got it, and it wasn't in great condition. So the fact that it even grew at all is kind of a miracle, and I just love it. I think it's beautiful. I've spent a lot of time down in the forest garden sharing all of the different plants that we grow down here. So if you would like to check out a list of all of the shrubs and the fruit trees that we plant here, I'm going to put together a blog post for you for this week that you can go and check out, and you can kind of see a layout and what I've done and kind of what's worked and what's not. Before we go, I have one more really cute thing to show you. So this is one of my haskap bushes, or honeyberry bushes here, and we've been picking honeyberries off of this bush for weeks, and they're absolutely delicious, and I love them, and I've talked about them a ton. But when my son was down here picking the other day, he noticed something. Can you guys see Tiny under there? So that is one of our Welsh Harlequin ducks, and she is sitting on a clutch of eggs. Hey, sweetheart. Okay, we'll leave you alone. We only have 2 ducks on our farm, and I've shared this before. In a similar way that I plant my garden to be a place of joy, a place of happiness for me and for my family, our farm's kind of the same way. We have the utilitarian aspect of our farm that has to do with food production, but we also have some things on our farm that are here for our joy and pleasure, and our ducks are some of those animals. So we just have 2. We have a male and female, Felix and Tiny, and they are, I think there must be 7 or 8 now, and they just free range around our farm. And every couple of years, Tiny hatches out some babies, and it looks like this is going to be one of those years. So I'm really excited to share those with you. I think she only has another week left to sit on those eggs, and then we should have some little ducklings on the farm, which is quite exciting. All right, friends, that's going to be it for today's video. I hope that you enjoyed it. I certainly did enjoy wandering around the garden. It's kind of nice doing these garden tours because I can just wander and share with you the beauty of the garden without having to do any work out in the garden. If you have any gardening questions for me, please don't hesitate to drop those down in the comment section below. I'll do my best to read and answer as many of them as I can. And I hope that you have an absolutely fantastic rest of your day. See you again soon, friends. Bye.